I know two stories about this piece of poetry. One was about John Stuart Mill. Do you know who John Stuart Mill was? John Stuart Mill was the philosopher, the utilitarian philosopher, who said that what is good is the greatest number, the greatest happiness to the greatest number. So if something creates happiness, that is good. If it doesn't create happiness, then that is bad. So this is utilitarian philosophy. Very materialistic, very logical, and he was, that was him. He was the disciple of Bentham, and he was a leading exponent of utilitarian philosophy. Now, he had a nervous breakdown when he was in his 20s, when he realized that if the world was perfect and everybody was happy, he would not be happy. And this gave him a profound crisis. And he had a mental breakdown, and he read Intimations of Immortality, and it made him better. It cured him. That's one story. The other story is about William Blake. Do you know William Blake? He was a great poet and a designer. He was a designer. If you saw his posters, you would recognize it. Because although he was writing 250 years ago and painting, you would still see his paintings today. But Blake, when this poem in 1807, Blake was an old man. He was an old man, and he was sitting on a stool, and a friend of his, Crabb Robertson, came and read this poem to him. And as I said, it's a very, very long poem. So Blake sat there listening very quietly while Crabb Robertson read the poem page after page after page. And when Crabb Robertson came to this line, "But there's a tree of many one," Blake exploded in joy and rapture. Something about that line that got him really, really excited. And Crabb Robertson said that when he read this poem, he would all to other friends, he would ignore this line, he'd cut it out because he thought it was too strange. So the very line that his friends found difficult were exactly the lines that Blake loved. So remember that. The boy, the lovely boy, like one whose hair is unsinged amongst the fiery furnace, a beautiful, perfect boy. And remember the whither has fled the visionary gleam, and at length the man perceived it die away, fade into the light of common day. Those are big themes that we find in Pink Floyd. Okay, let's move to Pink Floyd. Some important dates. 1964, Pink Floyd was formed, not with Gilmour, but with Syd Barrett, Roger Waters, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason. Those are the four. That's, of course, the first important date. And I think what I should say at this stage is that all music bands, they all have a hierarchy. In every band, there's somebody dominates. And they either dominate because they have the strongest musical ability, or they dominate for philosophical, literary purposes. So in the Beatles, maybe John Lennon dominated because of his philosophy, his philosophical position, political position. And in Rolling Stones, Keith Richards is the musical dominant power. There's always somebody. And in Pink Floyd, the absolute control was Syd Barrett, who was the youngest one of the group. He was the one who had all the ideas. He was the one who wrote all the music. He was the one who did all the experimentation. He was the one that everybody looked to. So when he walked into a room, people would look at Syd Barrett. He was the one that the girls would throw themselves at. He was the guy. So his head of music, he was a life force. Syd Barrett. Now let's look at some other dates, important dates in Pink Floyd's development. One very important date is one that much earlier, 1943. And in 1943, Waters' father was killed. He was killed in war, and Waters was born in 1943. So he was born after his father was killed, so he never met his father. And this loss of his father becomes a very, very strong theme in their music. And that links up to the loss of Syd Barrett later on, but it's an important date. And in the visual imagination of Pink Floyd, you often see the war. You often see war images, loss, war, and it dates back to that. He never met his father, and one day he opened the drawer in his mother's bedroom, and he found a letter from the king to the wife saying your husband been killed in battle, with a rubber stamp instead of the signature. And this hurt him very much, this idea that the king would send a rubber stamp, not bother with the signature, somebody who's lost their husband. But with 60,000 people being killed in 1 month, what can you do? So that's very important. Now, in 67, 68, another very, very important time. Around 66, 67, Sid developed a very, very strong interest in chemistry. It might surprise you.
Yeah.
He got a very interest in chemistry, and in fact he would experiment with any sort of chemical that came his way. Any sort of drug, any sort of chemical, he would experiment. And he fell in with a group of people who were using LSD. They were using LSD not once or twice a week, for all the time. They used it almost like a religious instrument. So he was using LSD and many other drugs, and he was having a great time. But slowly the LSD and the drugs started having an effect. And it's possible that Sid was a little bit, maybe he had a weakness anyway, maybe he was a bit schizophrenic. But whatever it was, it started to affect his brain. And the band all describe how one day he just turned up and something had gone. Something had burnt in his brain and something had gone. And they describe his eyes as being dark holes, like black holes, his eyes. So this guy who was full of life and light and wonderful creativity, something had gone. He was the soul of the band. He had all the music. So the band didn't know what to do without him. They needed him. So they waited for Sid to come back. But of course he never did come back. He never came back. So for a year, they would take him to their gig show. They would take him to the gigs, and sometimes he would play, sometimes he'd just stand there, sometimes he'd play one note, repeatedly, and he was just getting more and more erratic. He became aggressive to his girlfriend and partner, and then after about a year, the band said, should we not bother with Sid? And they said, don't bother with him. They left him behind, he went off, and they didn't see him again for 15, 20 years. And at this time, when he was being very erratic because of drugs, they brought in Dave Gilmour. Did I tell you about my friend Gilmour? And they brought in Gilmour. Gilmour had been a friend of Sid at school. They'd been in primary school together. So he'd known Sid for a long time. He knew the music. He was a great guitarist, and he knew Pink Floyd's music. So he would move in when Sid wasn't working, he would cover for Sid. So when Sid finally had a breakdown, Gilmour joined the band full time. So in 1968, Sid had a breakdown and he ended up in an asylum looking at the wall at the age of 23. Sid did all that, and by the age of 23, he was burnt out. That beautiful boy as I beheld him then. Now the band had a real problem because they'd lost Sid, nobody knew how to write music, and out of desperation, Waters took over. He started writing the music. And he said that he felt he didn't know how to write music. He said that at school, everybody told him he was useless, bloody useless. So he felt bloody useless. And he started, he did manage to write. And of course he found his theme. And his theme was the loss of Sid. The band had a lot of guilt, a lot of pain because of losing Sid and abandoning him. So he had this very heavy burden. And this became his theme. Loss of a loved one, loss of the father, loss of Sid, but also loss of potential, loss of vision, loss of creativity, the same idea of Wordsworth. And he came out with some of the best rock and roll ever written. Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, The Wall. Fantastic music. Right, let's have a look at the lyrics of Pink Floyd before we listen to it. The first piece I chose was Comfortably Numb. And look at the lyrics here. Is there anybody in there? Just nod if you can hear me. Is there anyone home? Come on now. I hear you feeling down. Well, I can see your pain. Get you on your feet again. Relax. I need some information. This is about a childhood illness. And Waters is saying when he was a child, he had an illness. And then they gave him an injection, and he became comfortably numb. Now, the childhood illness that he describes becomes an image, a metaphor for growing older. So in the way that Wordsworth's baby becomes a man and loses the vision, the same thing happens here. Now I'm middle-aged, now I've grown up, now I'm comfortably numb. I've lost my vision. There is no pain, you are receding, a distant ship's smoke on the horizon. That's a wonderful image. You can see a ship disappearing over the horizon, the smoke. It speaks of loss, of something going away, of something being of loneliness. And then, when I was a child, I had a fever, my hands felt like two balloons. Now I've got that feeling once again. I cannot explain, you would not understand. That's not how I am. I have become comfortably numb. So the adult is what Nietzsche might call despicable ease. And then it goes on. When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but it was gone. I cannot put my finger on it now. The child has grown, the dream has gone, I've become comfortably numb. And the Wordsworth bit is that. The child has grown, the dream has gone. Wordsworth, where has the visionary dream gone? The man grows older and he sees it fade away. That's a perfectly Wordsworthian lyric.